Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, depending on where you are, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm Tina Barr, the Director of Training and Education for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. NACOLE is an organization that works to create a community of support for independent civilian oversight entities seeking to make their local law enforcement jails, prisons, and law agencies more transparent, accountable, and responsive to the communities they serve. One part of that effort is our webinar series. Since 2015, NACOLE has used the webinar series to bring you information on effective practices in civilian oversight, innovations in the field, and efforts to reform the criminal legal system. Before we get into the webinar, I'd like to go over a few logistics. So first, you have the ability to turn on your captions for this webinar by using the caption button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also, the chat feature is disabled today. However, the Q&A feature is on. So please feel free to type your questions there at any time. Everyone will have the ability to upvote questions that are typed into the Q&A feature by clicking the thumbs up icon beside each question. And so that will help us to determine which questions to address given the limited time that we have today. To allow for more time and actual direct engagement with our speakers for today, immediately after the webinar, we'll host an optional 30-minute discussion. And so if you would like to join us for that direct engagement, I will drop the Zoom link for that meeting about 10 to 15 minutes before the end of the hour that we have here first to start off with. And so with that being said, please note that the webinar is being recorded and will be available for you for 3 months. And you will have or receive an email by the end of next week with a link to the recording as well as a link to any of the slides of PDF version of the slides that are used today. Okay, so moving on to the webinar. The title of it is The New World of Artificial Intelligence, Opportunities for Civilian Oversight Practitioners, ? For the sake of time, I'll give an abbreviated description of the webinar as well as the speakers' bios. Please know that the full description and the full speaker bios are on our website on the webinar page of the website. So today's webinar, among the topics our speakers will address are AI programs that can assist in mining data, some of the challenges presented by implementing AI technology and strategies to address those challenges, and AI that is being developed for and used by law enforcement, such as automated license plate readers, facial recognition, and drones. Our speakers today are Michael Giannacco, Julie Rowland, and Bruce Stoffmacher. Michael Giannacco is a principal of OIR Group. OIR Group works with local governments, community members, and police agencies to address contemporary challenges regarding policing and to collaborate on sustainable reforms. Mike has extensive experience in oversight, including heading up civilian oversight in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for 13 years and playing a central role in creating independent oversight models for both the largest sheriff's department and prison system in the United States. Mike has worked with and continues to work with countless jurisdictions providing oversight-related services. Prior to his work in police oversight, Mike served as an assistant U.S. attorney, chief of the Civil Rights Section, and was responsible for prosecuting police officers for excessive force and other constitutional violations. Julie Rowland is also a principal of OIR Group, where she has provided oversight-related services to numerous agencies and municipalities in several states. She currently serves as the project manager for the Santa Clara County Office of Corrections and Law Enforcement Monitoring and leads the Office of Inspector General for Santa Cruz County in California. From 2011 to 2014, Julie was deputy chief for the Office of Independent Review in Los Angeles County. Immediately prior to joining OIR Group, Julie worked at the Police Assessment Resource Center in Los Angeles, and before that had a private law practice that focused on civil rights and criminal defense. Bruce Stoffmacher is a senior privacy analyst in the Privacy Office of the County of Santa Clara, California. He has played a lead role in working with over 20 agencies to develop surveillance use policies to balance law enforcement operations and public oversight. Previously, Bruce worked for the Oakland Police Department, where he served as liaison to the city's Privacy Advisory Commission as well as the City Council. And he played a key role in developing surveillance technology policies, contracts, and interagency agreements. Prior to his time at the OPD, Bruce served as a policy analyst for an Oakland council member, and he began his career as a teacher in South Central Los Angeles before pivoting to public policy after graduate school. So without further ado, I will turn things over to our panelists for the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. It was appreciate the introduction. It's good to be with virtual company and appreciate the attendees who have decided to join us for this discussion. I am pleased to have two panelists, and you've heard their bios, with me today, Julie and Bruce. This webinar is intended to provide at least some introductory thoughts about artificial intelligence and how the increased technological capabilities of AI can assist oversight practitioners as well as provide challenges to those same practitioners. The webinar will also cover ways in which law enforcement are increasingly considering implementing AI-generated tools, technology, and even weapons to advance their interest in providing public safety. And we'll be talking about that as well as oversight's role with regard to, as these new technologies and tools are being developed, what oversight's appropriate role would be in ensuring that the development of those tools are consistent with our Constitution, privacy concerns, and other issues. We have a slide presentation that is really intended just to guide the discussion. This is a dictionary definition of what artificial intelligence is. We are not going to dive deep into how AI does what it does or how it is able to manage the accumulation of data and then using that data to output helpful mechanisms for individuals. That's probably want to talk to a computer scientist to get that information. We also are going to use a loose definition of what AI is. So some of these tools may or may not be considered AI, depending on the purists of the area. But we're going to just really have a broad definition to encompass other kinds of computer-assisted technology that may not formally come within AI rubric, but is we're going to lump it together as computer-assisted technology. What we thought we would do is start out with a problem and sort of talk through the problem as well as talking about ways in which this type of problem can assist. The problem, as set out in the slide, is based on a real situation, but we're going to move away from that actual incident, but talk about ways in which some of the issues regarding that incident can assist. Julie, can you just go over the problem and talk about what some of the challenges have been with regard to these kinds of problems? And this is focused on the correctional setting. We're going to be talking about ways in which AI can be helpful in both the correctional setting as well as in the patrol setting. But Julie, do you want to just walk through some of the problems here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mike. And good morning and afternoon to all of you. Thanks for joining us. As Mike said, this is, this sort of problem or challenge is one that is, it's a scenario that we've seen many times in different settings, different jurisdictions. But essentially, it's the problem of incarcerated people engaging in assaultive behavior on each other. And, what is the ability of law enforcement, of correctional officers to intervene and stop those kinds of assaults. As we know, the incarcerated people can be savvy to the ways in which a particular housing unit is patrolled, and as this slide suggests, the assaulters can time their attack to happen in between safety checks. Nonetheless, all of these jail facilities have a lot of fixed cameras that are capturing footage all of the time. The problem is, how is that footage being monitored? How are those videos being seen? I think many members of the public expect that if there are cameras there, that somebody is sitting and watching what's happening on those cameras. And the reality is, with staffing challenges and the sort of labor intense, the amount of labor it would take to actively watch all of those cameras, sometimes hundreds or thousands in a given facility, it's just impossible, and impossible to expect that a person is monitoring those as those cameras in real time. And so the question is, can AI assist in that challenge of how do we monitor those cameras in a way that could help correctional officers intervene to stop an assault or other criminal activity that's happening within a jail facility? I'm going to turn to Bruce because I know he's got some very specific information about the state of the technology with as far as how these monitoring systems can work. So welcome, Bruce.
And Bruce,
Thank you.
You're on. So what do we
Okay.
got? What do we got here?
Okay. Well,
Potentially.
thank you, Julie and Mike and Tina, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So in Santa Clara County, California, where I work, I know the custody division of the sheriff's office is looking at what could they do with AI. So they have over 600 cameras at the two jail facilities, and as Julie was saying, there's a lot of cameras. There's a bunch of monitors. There really is not enough staff people to possibly in real time look at it all. So there's two things that I think are interesting that are happening. One is, can we use AI to kind of train the data to look for weapons? Can we can AI learn to identify, oh, that's a knife, that is rope, that is a gun? And then secondly, as you have all these different cameras throughout the facility, can the AI learn where the different cameras are positioned with each other, so that if someone is moving, they're here, now they're in this camera, but now they've moved and now they're under this camera. And so that is what we see different technology vendors are doing, is they're developing the AI to kind of weave all these different cameras together, as well as try to train them. We're seeing that happen more in campuses, technology vendors working with more like academia, campus, retail, but the same technology hopefully can be applied to law enforcement in jail. And so we're actively looking at it right now. The sheriff hasn't implemented anything yet, but they are eagerly hoping, because you do have these unfortunate situations where people are potentially harming each other or doing self-harm to each other. So it's kind of still a little bit of the Wild West, and maybe that's a phrase we could use with in a number of the scenarios we're going to talk about today, but that's what's happening right now.
Right. So we're not quite there yet, but there is some promising technology that could detect the sort of irregular movements or a weapon inside a correctional facility that might be helpful in intervening and stopping these kinds of assaults.
Yeah, and it might be an iterative process where we implement something and we find out, oh, it's too sensitive. It's notifying there's deputies about every 5 minutes about something. So how do we go through that process of iteration and figure and the AI gets smarter. I think that's what's going to happen over time.
Right, and this slide is intended to identify some of the potential issues, which is as the cameras are learning to get better, what if there is an incident and the camera doesn't pick it up? Or alternatively, what if that alert is sent to a supervisor, but the supervisor is busy with other responsibilities and the violence does not get prevented? And then finally, the tampering with the cameras. So as Bruce indicated, nothing's a panacea. There are always going to be issues, but if there can be a way to effectively develop a system that can interrupt a planned assault before it occurs, so much better with regard to keeping incarcerated people safe while they're in custody.
And I think, Mike, another, just to add before we move on, and it's a thing that's going to be a theme as we talk about AI broadly this morning, is the answer to all of those questions still rests with actual human beings interacting, right? So if the cameras go down, we expect still to have supervisors who are responding, who are noticing things. We expect that if there are alerts given by the AI system, that those are heeded and that you get an actual live human response. And so, while AI can help us address a lot of these things, I think a broad theme is you can't take the humans out, at least not yet.
I think at least not yet is the operative phrase here. If we were doing a webinar 50 years from now, and I'm not going to be on that webinar, I can tell you that, the computers may run the whole webinar and human beings are peripheral. But let's assume that we're not there yet. Again, in a sense of trying to survey potential ways in which AI can assist, here is another challenge that oversight practitioners, I think, are often confronted with. Generally speaking, oversight focuses traditionally and heavily on reviewing civilian complaints and using those complaints as a basis for identifying and addressing police misconduct. But in our experience as oversight practitioners and talking to others, I think more and more communities are expecting oversight to come up with different ways to evaluate how the community writ large is feeling about the services provided by their public safety organizations, and not just adhering to waiting until a complaint comes in before that oversight mechanism can come into play. So more and more times we've been asked to develop surveys and to try to get a better sense of what the community is thinking about oversight. I'm sorry, about their police departments or their sheriff's departments in a broader way. There are ways that AI can assist with regard to this, and here's one of them. So under this scenario, and the program does exist, whenever anyone calls 911, call for service, the call is routed to dispatch. Obviously, officers are sent to the call. But then what happens for those who subscribe to this service is that the caller then gets a follow-up survey. In the same way that after you may travel on American Airlines, you may get an email from American Airlines saying, how'd we do on that last flight? It's a very similar approach here. And then the survey asks several questions that the caller can choose to respond to or not. And then the department gets feedback from that individual with the idea that that can be a window into that call, how the public felt about it, as well as providing commendations for officers who, according to the caller, have done well, and maybe some course correction for allegations from the community that the performance was suboptimal. Again, another way to use computer-generated information to get some feedback loops that currently probably don't exist in most organizations. We oversee one agency that has worked with a vendor to develop this system. But then here are some of the collateral considerations with regard to that system, and just some questions to be asked about the efficacy of the system, um, whether that system can be used to make the complaint process more robust. I think different agencies may land in different places about whether or not that can be a form whereby suboptimal performance is then turned into a complaint investigation. And then should the focus be entirely on the caller? What about witnesses? What about if there's an arrest or a citation? What about the person who gets the arrest or citation? Should that same outreach be sent to that individual? And with regard to the development of the prompt and feedback questions, what kinds of things are being looked at? Who's going to develop those? Does oversight have a role there in developing those types of questions? If oversight is interested in learning more about the nature of that call, should oversight be contributing to the kinds of questions that are asked of the caller or anyone else who's a participant in that system? And then finally, what interventions are possible? Is it going to be training? Is it going to be guidance, counseling, debriefing, good or bad? Or, as indicated, should that possibility be that there is an actual complaint investigation behind an allegation that's received through this system? Julia, Bruce, anything further on this issue that you can think of?
I think those are all great questions that really every jurisdiction would have to sort of weigh out for themselves. There's some fairness issues, but also access and, what exactly are you measuring and whether the cost of the system, justifies or whether the data you're going to get out of it justifies the cost. But those, I think they're all great questions and some really promising technology.
It's interesting that my experience is that police do not have a culture of seeking this type of feedback on a regular basis, unlike private industry, which has apparently seen value in such feedback because almost all of them do it. And it gets annoying. I almost never respond to them. But there are times in which I've been very pleased or not and have responded. So I think that private industry recognizes the value here. In the same way that if you sometimes see commercial trucks on their mud flaps, they'll say, "How am I driving? If you have an issue, call the following number." And I don't know if anyone does. I've never done it, but it's a sort of a technology-aided way to advance concepts like that.
Yeah, I think the real key question for me and thinking of it from the oversight perspective is that the one that's sort of in the middle of the slide there. What about the detainee or the arrestee, right? You're only getting one side of it if the person who's called for service is the only opinion you're seeking. So I think agencies would have a little harder time swallowing sending out a survey to everyone they arrest, or everyone who as they get released from jail they get a survey about what they thought about their time in custody. I think those are harder sells for law enforcement, but would provide a more fair and balanced picture of how the system's working.
Right. I mean, I look for the day when some jail or prison is willing to do out interviews with people about to be released from the custody. That would be an interesting aspect. And I don't know that AI is needed to do that, although it could help. The third sort of area, just as again, looking for challenges and ways in which AI might assist, is something that I think more and more oversight practitioners are being challenged by, as well as other members of the criminal justice system. And that is the deluge of video and audio developed by body-worn cameras as they increase in their number. I think vast majority of law enforcement now have body-worn cameras, at least in our state of California, and I think it's a growing phenomenon. But quite frankly, most of that footage is never reviewed and never considered and never looked at by either the officers themselves as a self-correcting device, supervisors, or anyone else. Obviously, if there's an arrest behind the incident, the body-worn cap information is going to be captured. If there is a use of force that is needed to be reviewed, generally policies require that the body-worn camera then be obtained, downloaded, and reviewed. And then finally, if there's an internal affairs investigation, civil litigation, again, there is a mining of that information. But short of that, if there aren't those kinds of events, most of that footage is going to go away and never be reviewed. Certainly oversight doesn't have the resources to look at that as a matter of course. Some agencies do require supervisors to audit body-worn camera, but not all of it, just sort of sampling that auditing process. But more and more, there are vendors that are able to develop AI to help with this kind of detection. And Bruce, do you want to talk about sort of how that works? Not nuts and bolts, but what AI is being used to assist with regard to review of body-worn camera footage?
Sure. So there's a few things, and one of similar to with the example of the jails is you're taking all this camera footage, and it's just there being stored and not really being used in any type of active way. But now with AI, what we're starting to really actually seeing it being rolled out is that it can be used in different ways and not just there reactively if you need to find some type of evidence. So one key example is obviously you want to there's obviously you want to look at the video and see if there's evidence of something related to investigation. But now I know I used to work for the Oakland Police Department, and they started because they're under a consent decree, they had to do an analysis of a lot of body-worn camera footage to look for officer bias. But then they started working with this company, Trulio, that is offering an AI solution, saying, hey, instead of looking at just some auditing samples, we'll look at potentially all of your terabytes of data, and we're training it. In this case, they're not using video; they're taking the audio from the body-worn camera footage, which I think makes it a simpler process just in terms of all the energy and technology that's used. So they have an AI that's able to transcribe the audio of the video into text, and the generative AI is actually trained to look for specific language. You can imagine different types of words, unprofessional words, maybe even swearing. I'm not talking about OPD in particular. I'm just speaking generally, and they're able to figure out is the officer speaking in a constitutional policing manner, or are they using language that that might indicate that there's bias occurring. And again, obviously, you do need to have humans involved, but that is something I'm aware that different police departments in California are using that one company now to analyze the audio. And then I don't know if I want to stop there, but I'll just briefly mention what's interesting. Also, you're seeing since a lot of agencies are using Axon with their body-worn camera. There's a product now where they could actually take the body-worn camera and start to populate an arrest report, which is a whole nother interesting discussion we could have. I don't know if I want to stop there and
Sure.
can,
No,
yeah.
that sort of tees it up. Appreciate the description of how it's intended to work. That last bullet on this slide, also, I think there are times in which oversight learns that force was occurred and it wasn't reported, but this device could in fact develop ways in which unreported force could be detected through the use of AI. Um,
Oh,
the
I just want to
Go
chime in
ahead,
for a
Julie.
second here,
Please
Mike.
do.
I think,
Yeah.
this is one of the things that's, I think, very promising because, as Mike said, the amount of body worn camera footage out there is overwhelming now. And one of the things that we have recommended in the past is some requirement that sergeants do like a random audit of 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 camera footage, just to check for this kind of stuff, unprofessional language, and or on the converse, I think if you can have an AI model, or if you were just a sergeant reviewing this, you also want to be looking for officers who are doing a great job of de-escalating situations, right? Those are the kinds of things that are never going to come up in a police report or a use of force report. Those situations where officers are effectively talking to someone and preventing escalation of an incident. And so we would often make that recommendation, some number of random audits. And the pushback has always been, and understandable, it's just it's one more thing to do, and everybody's very busy, and staffing situations and on. And so the thought of having an AI model that could do that sort of random audit, if you will, is a very promising thing.
And again, as with the other challenges, the question then becomes, and the pushback from some who represent officers is essentially, you are now causing us to have a system where we are essentially being monitored all the time, or potentially monitored all the time. And our body-worn camera footage is going through this automated system to find all the problems and all the mistakes that we make in the field to our detriment. I think Julie's point is a good one, in the sense of, if you develop an even-handed approach to this process and also are rewarding a behavior that also may not go undetected, but for the use of AI, then I think you're going to put yourself in a better position with regard to using this process, or getting buy-in from the officers that this process can be valuable, and not just the stick approach, but also the carrot approach.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just pull up, I think, to make one final point about this, and not just on this, but with everything related to AI. So, and maybe Bruce can certainly talk about it with a lot more technical expertise than I can, but so much relies upon the quality of the data, right? AI works by creating algorithms, and it has to learn different patterns to make predictions, to be able to identify certain kinds of behavior or language. And it all starts with sort of the quality of the data that you have to kind of train these algorithms. And to the extent, and maybe this is something we can get into later, but there's as with everything, there are questions about how bias can creep into that kind of into that data, and what you can do to try to keep that bias out.
And Julie, that segue fits perfectly with this slide that I just put up, because this is an example where people are concerned about a technology that's been developed and that bias has crept into the development of that technology. Automated facial recognition. Automated facial recognition is a way in which AI is used to develop ways in which individuals can be identified. And one of the more prominent ways in which this was used was after the January 6th, whatever you want to call it, depending on your political persuasion, that individuals who were part of that process were then identified through facial recognition technology, either by the federal investigators or private civilians used automated facial technology on social media to identify individuals, and then provided those leads back to the investigators, the FBI. Um, but what went wrong here? What was the problem, and what has been the problem with regard to automated facial recognition? What have been some of the pushback, Bruce, with regard to its use?
Yeah, so there's a lot of understandable concern when you look at the potential for Big Brother. You look at what we see happening in China, for example, with the use of massive amount of cameras that are integrated with facial recognition. And the technology is super powerful. I mean, I imagine in this audience, a lot of people are familiar with some of the critiques and evidence that there has been bias in how some of the facial recognition has been trained using more, Caucasian males, for example, right? There's evidence that some of the ways that different facial recognition systems have been trained, they haven't used enough, African American or darker skinned faces, and so the technology works better or is more likely to misidentify people, and that's a real concern. And even when it does work well, we have to think about whether, from a privacy point of view, we want law enforcement to be using technology that may perhaps in real time is connecting with massive databases of other faces. One of the things I've heard expressed with some of the body-worn camera companies, for example, is there's the face recognition where it's actually connecting in real time to a database of lots of faces, maybe DOJ criminal justice arrest record type of data sets. But then there's also just face detection. So let's say we're talking about body-worn camera, and you have gazillions of terabytes of data. What if there's just a technology that allows you not in real time to be looking for a face, but just to identify, oh, that was a face, or hey, that was Bruce's face in this body-worn camera footage and we're trying to find out if there was a certain suspect. So there might be good uses where you're not using it in real time against massive data sets, where an officer potentially has a body-worn camera and they're out in the field and they're able to identify people in real time. That arguably is not something that a lot of governments want to see. But if you could use it retrospective after the fact, just to identify particular faces in investigation, that might be something that departments want to see. I can tell you in Santa Clara County, all of our surveillance policies have to say that there's no facial recognition technology integrated, because that's not something that we feel comfortable with seeing in our technology. If it comes down to body-worn camera, potentially in the future, just as an investigation to look at their data, that might be something that we see in the future.
Yeah, to Bruce's point, in addition to Santa Clara County, I think there are at least 13 other jurisdictions that have banned the use of facial recognition technology because of the concerns that have been raised. One of the things that I believe may have occurred is that in a rush to roll this technology out, it may have been rolled out too soon, and the devices, the AI assist, weren't ready, particularly with regard to detecting people of color and others, that they hadn't built up a sufficient denominator of information for. But that's where we are with facial recognition technology. A similar technology that has also come under scrutiny has to do with automated license plate readers. Julie, do you want to explain how those work?
Sure. Just briefly, they're generally fixed cameras. I mean, there are some agencies that have ALPR cameras in their patrol vehicles, but most often I think we're now talking of those tend to not work as well. So most often we're talking about a camera that's on a fixed pole that is literally making an image of every license plate that passes by. And generally, agencies that use these have what's called a hot list, and that'll be a list of vehicles of interest that are entered into. So, for example, a vehicle that's been reported stolen, the license plate will be entered in there. Other license plates that are known to be associated with a crime will be entered into the database, and when that license plate passes the camera, you get a hit, and then law enforcement can take action. That's generally how they work, and they have been controversial in a number of jurisdictions. Law enforcement cites them as being very effective in helping them identify suspects wanted in particular crimes, but they raise a bunch of privacy concerns for jurisdictions that don't like the idea that we can be tracking everybody's movement as they move through your city or county. There are accuracy issues, a lot of false positives in terms of just how accurate the camera is in being able to read the license plate. I'm going to skip over data security risks because I'm going to let Bruce talk about that. Mike's going to jumping ahead to this.
Yeah. Why did Eureka turn them down?
Largely because of the privacy concerns. I think the Eureka PD would argue that there's some misunderstanding by their council members about how the ALPR cameras can be used. There are a lot of, and again, I'm going to come back to this and bookmark it for Bruce to talk about sort of how we can overcome some of the privacy concerns, because he's our privacy expert. But two of the things that get cited a lot here in California are concerns about how this information could be shared with federal agents who are looking to investigate or looking to deport people, looking into immigration issues. So there's a concern about that, and then there's a big concern that out-of-state law enforcement agencies who are looking to perhaps enforce their own state's very strict abortion laws might be wanting to track out-of-state vehicles moving into this state for purposes of reproductive care, and California jurisdictions want to avoid that. There are ways, and again, I would say that's why Eureka PD would say there's some misunderstanding by their council members in some ways, because there are policy prohibitions against sharing the data with either the federal agency or any outside state agency. In fact, there's a California Attorney General opinion on this that says that local jurisdictions are prohibited from sharing their ALPR data with ICE agents, with any outside law enforcement agency from another state or from the federal government. So it's a complicated issue in some ways, and yet, for the law enforcement agencies, it's simple in that they want to be able to identify criminal behavior, and there are a host of examples where ALPR cameras have allowed law enforcement agencies to zero in and be able to track a known suspect. They identified a license plate at a murder scene, and we now have that license plate, and we can track its movement across a state, and that can be very helpful in apprehending someone. But again, I'm gonna let Bruce go and talk about some of the data privacy concerns and how you can draft policies to overcome some of those concerns or to address some of those concerns.
Sure. So I mean, you can understand why it's a big privacy issue, because this is one of those technologies where everyone is potentially exposed to it. If there's cameras on street poles, utility poles, freeway overpasses, what have you, in a certain area, everyone is, even though our our license plate is a government issued form of ID, people still have an expectation of some level of privacy in the public. Obviously, that evolves over time, but that's our expectation. And so that's definitely a big concern. And one of the themes that's related to ALPR as well as other technologies is, in the past, the sheriff or police department might buy an ALPR system, and they own the cameras, they own the computer where the database is populated. But now what you see is you have Block, Motorola, Axon, these different companies that are really providing the technology, and it's all cloud-based now. And so the potential for sharing the data outside of your agencies, with your neighboring agency, with every agency in California or the United States, it's really a matter of just software configurations. And so the concern about how we're sharing the data and how we're complying with sanctuary city laws, or whether or not it's accessible to ICE or agencies that the local agencies does not want to be sharing with. It's both the policy and really ensuring that the software is configured, because you can imagine you might have it set up, but it's possible to change the settings. And obviously another big issue is, how long are we holding the data for? That's really more of a privacy issue. It might be, again, in Oakland, there was a comfort level with the Privacy Commission to hold the data for a few months, but if you want to hold the data for a year or plus, then you are able to create more of a fact pattern around how people are moving about with their cars. And that's a real big concern for people. And just in terms of AI, it used to be that these cameras use optical character recognition to just take a photograph of a license plate and turn that into letters and numbers. But what I think with Flock, what they do now is they're actually taking pictures of the rear lights, the kind of light, and then the AI can tell, oh, that is a Honda Civic, or that's a Tesla, based on just the design of the images of the light. And so the systems are getting more sophisticated with AI, and so there's a lot to unpack there.
And there is, and with regard to some of the concerns that elected officials, leadership, community has presented, I think that organizations like yours, Bruce, the Privacy Office, or organization like Oversight Practitioners and what we do in Santa Clara County can be used to place guardrails on the use of their technology to ensure limited data sharing consistent with the community's wants. Those kinds of guardrails might provide some comfort as this technology is being rolled out.
Yeah, we have policies, and that's like that is good. We do have that opportunity to really be specific and limited to the extent that our board and our public feels comfortable with who we should be able to share the data with.
I want to move on. Our time is ebbing away here, and I appreciate the discussion, and want to save some time for questions. I'm just going to go through the shot spotters. It's another technology. Some of you may be aware it. It's kind of old school now. It's been around. One of the longer technologies has been around. It hasn't always worked very well. There have been concerns about where the shot spotters are placed in communities, in over-policed neighborhoods generally. And that's why, as well as the accuracy and the false positives, that's why some cities have gone in a different direction away from shot spotting, with Chicago being a good example. The last two things I wanted to sort of just touch upon in the really limited time we have are the increasing use of drones, and how drones are being marketed and being used as a suggestion to provide additional tools for law enforcement. and some of the more traditional ways in which law enforcement responds, such as use of canines, chemical agents, and helicopters to critical incidents, barricaded subjects, etc. More and more people are thinking that drones is a better solution here, as opposed to those more traditional types of law enforcement interventions. On the other hand, using drones creates other issues impacting the Fourth Amendment. This lawsuit was just announced a couple days ago in Sonoma County, where there is concern that there are Fourth Amendment violations, the way in which the county is using the drones that they have for code enforcement, which is part of the sheriff's department, I believe. Um, the same is true with regard to using drones in First Amendment activity, um, and a concern that um, it may chill those who want to exercise their First Amendment rights to have drones overhead. Now, most drones do not record and are really being used for a limited purpose to detect illegal activity in the moment, but the protester won't necessarily know that. And so there is a concern about chilling First Amendment rights by using drones. Robots is the last piece for our discussion. And again, these are being used more and more frequently to replace officers in going into dangerous situations. And there are obviously some advantages there. But if you go back 10 years ago, there was this highly controversial use of a police robot armed with explosives to essentially come up on a suspect who had killed two officers and eliminate that individual through use of the robot as well as the explosives. As a result of the concerns, some cities have banned the use of weaponized drones or robots in their jurisdiction, at least for now. Although the police are pushing back and continuing to try to allow an exception for the rare circumstance where a drone or robot might be used as a weapon, and that's certainly something that is going to, I think, continue to be part of the narrative as we move forward. Way down the road, people are talking about using driverless police vehicles instead of and replacing the patrol vehicles with this driverless first responder, drones as a first responder. Some would suggest that not having an officer behind the wheel would reduce the need to conduct pretext stops and the like. And this is just sort of an overall slide to talk about, different ways in which AI is being used in other aspects of what police do. Everything from helping assist with report writing to crime mapping, case analysis, performance evaluations. All these AI has continued to increase its use in each of these functions involving police. Same is true with regard to corrections in the jail and prison settings, where AI is being considered more and more as a tool to be used with regard to some of what corrections folks are being required to do. We don't have time to get into all of these with any detail, but the slide sort of talks about ways in which this technology is being used here. States are trying to regulate AI for the various reasons we've talked about in our presentation. But the big, beautiful bill that is currently pending in Congress would potentially eliminate the ability of states to get involved in regulating AI at the state level and perhaps even at the local level, depending on whether that legislation ends up getting enacted. But as I understand, the current legislation would prohibit for 10 years states to get to develop its own regulatory devices in the area of AI. Finally, I'll just talk about AI. One of the biggest concerns about AI is that it may replace jobs. that are currently being done by people. And I'm concerned that my job may go away as a result of that. And as a sort of think piece, I thought, well, what about an oversight practitioner? Could AI essentially replace a lot of what oversight does? And these are the 5 things that I think oversight are most involved in today's world. And the question is, could AI, robots, virtual individuals, virtual computers replace any of these roles to any significant degree? Are they a tool or are they a replacement mechanism, I guess is the question. Um, and so, again, the investigative process itself, more and more individuals are considering using AI and replacing investigators, replacing the interviewing process with an AI sort of process. Um, that can be done more quickly. Some would argue it eliminates bias. Some would argue that the bias is still going to exist because those who are programming the AI tools also have bias that may creep into the way in which these investigative tools are developed.
So Mike, I'm going to jump in because I'm looking at the Q&A here, and there's some good questions that have popped up in the Q&A, and
we've got 3 minutes.
We've got 3 minutes, so
All right.
we've answered some of them as we've gone along, and I'm going to invite anybody whose question we didn't get to, and I'm going to invite everyone to join us in the next sort of open-ended link where we can do some live discussion back and forth. But one question I'm going to get to right now is, can you describe how AI is being used in correctional settings? And so we started off talking about one potential use that is still kind of, as Bruce said, the wild west in terms of the technologies maybe not quite there. But there's some other ways it is currently being used, and I think that we're on the verge of being able to use it. One big one that is interesting to me is perimeter security, right? So you could have a drone patrolling a perimeter of a jail. Some of these jails are set in very rural settings, and the opportunity to introduce contraband weapons or drugs by throwing things over a fence or somehow breaching those perimeters are a way that I think you could have a drone or AI monitored cameras, systems that are meant to detect irregularities that could monitor those borders. Other ways I think it's being used would be in screening phone calls, mail, or other communications, right? So in the same way you can train an AI system to review body-worn camera footage, as we talked about, you could train it to screen for keywords related to gang activities, or again, introduction of contraband, those sorts of things. And then all kinds of things that we see AI being used for in the sort of outside applications, if you will, things like having a bot that could schedule visitation, any task that sort of requires some analysis and decision making. You can use you could train theoretically an AI model to do, for example, like risk assessments to try to make decisions about cell assignments, classifications, different decisions that are made on intake in terms of how you're going to treat an incarcerated person in housing and that kind of assignment. So those are some of the ways. I'm not aware that many places are using it yet, but I think we're right on the verge of having that kind of technology available in corrections. I am really sorry that we didn't get to some of these other questions. Again, I'm going to invite everyone to join us in the next room, and I'm going to turn it back to Tina now for that.
Thank you so much, Mike, Julie, and Bruce. And thank you, audience members, for joining us today. And one of the benefits of going into the post discussion is that we've got a collective wisdom, right? Everyone who's there. So if we don't, there might be someone who has some insight or some information, they may be knowledgeable about where it might be being used in a corrections environment. So for everyone who is interested in joining us for the post-webinar discussion, the Zoom link and the meeting ID and passcode are in the chat. You should not need the meeting ID and passcode to enter. As soon as you click it, you should go directly in there. However, I provide it because every once in a while we get one or two people who are requested to provide it. So if you want to take a moment to copy and paste it, I am going to hang back a little bit just to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to do that. I will like to remind everyone that by the end of next week, you will have a follow-up email related to this webinar with a link to the recording so that you can review the recording for the next 3 months. Only registrants will be able to do that. And then just a reminder that the NACOLE conference is happening in October of this year, and we plan on having registration open within the next few weeks. And so check back on our website for that. Okay, so
Tina, I have a quick
yes.
question. Will the Q&A, can I keep the Q&A open somehow and have that so we can refer to that in the next
I have
space,
copied the
or?
questions. I've copied the questions, and so I
Thank
can
you.
drop those in the chat when we get to that room. So I want to
Thank
make
you very
sure
much.
the three of you are able to get into that chat. And so you feel free whenever you're ready to log off and or click that Zoom link, and then you'll immediately be kicked out of here, and you'll be put in a waiting room for me. So just wait for me, and I'll be there shortly.
We'll see you